welcome. Hope you're having a
Merry
beautiful,
Christmas Eve.
yes, beautiful Christmas Eve as you're joining us today. We're going to do something a little bit fun, a little bit quirky, and we're just going to hang out with you for a little bit, and we're going to read a couple of our favorite
A
things.
couple of our favorite stories for Christmas time. The first will be The Gift of the Wise Men, sometimes called The Gift of the Magi, by the very famous American short story writer O. Henry. And we're going to read, Fletcher will be reading, the very famous and well beloved and known poem, "'Twas the Night Before Christmas," which it is indeed. Tonight is Christmas Eve and the night before Christmas. I
All right.
want to say The Gift of the Wise Men by O. Henry is a story that I first came to know in a very memorable way because I was in the fifth grade. And what I recall is that we had a teacher that none of us really liked. I'm sorry, Miss Basha. She was kind of, let's say, a bit of an overreactor. And we were kind of a wild bunch. And I recall that she had given out this story for us to read during quiet time, but nobody was quiet. Everyone thought it looked boring. They didn't want to read it. And I remember sitting next to someone I really didn't get along with that well, but she was also a very smart girl. Her name was Gina. Gina, shout out to you. And she's a nurse today. And I remember she and I said, you know what? While the class is cutting up and going crazy and Miss Basha cannot get order, why don't we just actually read it aloud? Because we were supposed to sit quietly and read it. There was no chance of that. Everyone was making noise and playing games and talking. And the teacher had kind of given up at the front and let us do it. She and I decided to sit and read it out loud so we could hear ourselves think and actually read it. And we were amazed. What a wonderful story. We were like, this teacher is genius. She gave us something brilliant to read. And when the time was over and the teacher asked us, what did we get from it? We were the only two who had actually read it, of course. And we had a lot to say. And I still remember that and still love it to this day. So hopefully you will love it too.
Awesome. Yeah. So, shall we dive into it?
Yes, let's do it, Fletcher.
All right. So, it's The Gift of the Wise Men, or also known The Gift of the Magi by O. Henry. And we have beautiful illustration by Charles M. Relea. Here we go.
$1.87. That was all. And 60 cents of it was in pennies. Pennies saved 1 and 2 at a time by bulldozing the grocer and the vegetable man and the butcher until one's cheeks burned with the silent imputation of parsimony that such close dealing implied. 3 times Della counted it. $1.87. And the next day would be Christmas. There was clearly nothing to do but flop down on the shabby little couch and howl. So Della did it, which instigates the moral reflection that life is made up of sobs, sniffles, and smiles, with sniffles predominating. While the mistress of the home is gradually subsiding from the first stage to the second, take a look at the home. A furnished flat at $8 per week. It did not exactly beggar description, but it certainly had that word on the lookout for the mendicancy squad. In the vestibule below was a letterbox into which no letter would go, and an electric button from which no mortal finger could coax a ring. Also appertaining thereunto was a card bearing the name Mr. James Dillingham Young. The Dillingham had been flung to the breeze during a former period of prosperity when its possessor was being paid $30 per week. Now, when the income was shrunk to $20, the letters of Dillingham looked blurred, as though they were thinking seriously of contracting to a modest and unassuming D. But whenever Mr. James Dillingham Young came home and reached his flat above, he was called Jim and greatly hugged by Mrs. James Dillingham Young, already introduced to you as Della. which is all very good. Della finished her cry and attended her cheeks with the powder rag. She stood by the window and looked out dully at a gray cat walking a gray fence in a gray backyard. Tomorrow would be Christmas Day, and she had only $1.87 with which to buy Jim a present. She had been saving every penny she could for months. With this result, $20 a week doesn't go far. Expenses had been greater than she had calculated. They always are. Only $1.87 to buy a present for Jim, her Jim. Many a happy hour she had spent planning for something nice for him, something fine and rare and sterling, something just a little bit near to being worthy of the honor of being owned by Jim. There was a pier glass between the windows of the room. Perhaps you have seen a pier glass in an $8 flat. A very thin and very agile person may, by observing his reflection in a rapid sequence of longitudinal strips, obtain a fairly accurate conception of his looks. Della, being slender, had mastered the art. Suddenly, she whirled from the window and stood before the glass. Her eyes were shining brilliantly, but her face had lost its color within 20 seconds. Rapidly, she pulled down her hair and let it fall to its full length. Now, there were two possessions of the James Dillingham Youngs in which they both took a mighty pride. One was Jim's gold watch that had been his father's and his grandfather's. The other was Della's hair. Had the Queen of Sheba lived in the flat across the air shaft, Della would have let her hair hang out the window someday to dry just to depreciate Her Majesty's jewels and gifts. Had King Solomon been the janitor, with all his treasures piled up in the basement, Jim would have pulled out his watch every time he passed, just to see him pluck at his beard from envy. So now, Della's beautiful hair fell about her, rippling and shining like a cascade of brown waters. It reached below her knee and made itself almost a garment for her. And then she did it up again nervously and quickly. Once she faltered for a minute and stood still while a tear or two splashed on the worn red carpet. On went her old brown jacket. On went her old brown hat. With a whirl of skirts and with the brilliant sparkle still in her eyes, she fluttered out the door and down the stairs to the street. Where she stopped, the sign read, Madame Sofronie, hair goods of all kinds. One flight up Della ran and collected herself panting. Madame, large, too white, chilly, hardly looked the Sofronie. Will you buy my hair? Asked Della. I buy hair, said Madame. Take your hat off and let's have a sight at the looks of it. Down rippled the brown cascade. $20, said Madame, lifting the mass with a practiced hand. Give it to me quick, said Della. Oh, and the next 2 hours tripped by on rosy wings. Forget the hashed metaphor. She was ransacking the stores for Jim's present. She found it at last. It surely had been made for Jim and no one else. There was no other like it in any of the stores. And she had turned all of them inside out. It was a platinum fob chain, simple and chaste in design, properly proclaiming its value by substance alone and not by meretricious ornamentation, as all good things should do. It was even worthy of the watch. As soon as she saw it, she knew that it must be Jim's. It was like him. Quietness and value. The description applied to both. $21 they took from her for it, and she hurried home with the 87 cents. With that chain on his watch, Jim might be properly anxious about the time in any company. Grand as the watch was, He sometimes looked at it on the sly on account of the old leather strap he used in place of a chain. When Della reached home, her intoxication gave way a little to prudence and reason. She got out her curling irons and lighted the gas and went to work repairing the ravages made by generosity added to love, which is always a tremendous task, dear friends, a mammoth task. Within 40 minutes, her head was covered with tiny, close-lying curls that made her look wonderfully like a truant schoolboy. She looked at her reflection in the mirror long, carefully, and critically. If Jim doesn't kill me, she said to herself, before he takes a second look at me, he'll say I look like a Coney Island chorus girl. But what could I do? Oh, what could I do with $1.87? At 7 o'clock, the coffee was made and the frying pan was on the back of the stove, hot and ready to cook the chops. Jim was never late. Della doubled the fob chain in her hand and sat on the corner of the table near the door that he always entered. Then she heard his step on the stairway down on the first flight, and she turned white for just a moment. She had a habit of saying little silent prayers about the simplest everyday things, and now she whispered, "Please, God, make him think I'm still pretty." The door opened and Jim stepped in and closed it. He looked thin and very serious. Poor fellow, he was only 22 and to be burdened with a family. He needed a new overcoat and he was without gloves. Jim stopped inside the door as immovable as a setter at the scent of quail. His eyes were fixed upon Della, and there was an expression in them that she could not read, and it terrified her. It was not anger, nor surprise, nor disapproval, nor horror, nor any of the sentiments that she had been prepared for. He simply stared at her fixedly with that peculiar expression on his face. Della wriggled off the table and went for him. "Jim, darling," she cried, "don't look at me that way. I had my hair cut off and sold it because I couldn't live through Christmas without giving you a present. It'll grow out again. You won't mind, will you? I just had to do it. My hair grows awfully fast. Say Merry Christmas, Jim, and let's be happy. You don't know what a beautiful, nice gift I've got for you."
"You cut off your hair?"
asked Jim laboriously, as if he had not arrived at that patent fact yet, even after the hardest mental labor. "Cut it off and sold it," said Della. Don't you like me just as well anyhow? I'm me without my hair, ain't I? Jim looked about the room curiously.
"You say your hair is gone?"
he said with an air almost of idiocy. "You needn't look for it," said Della. "It's sold. I tell you, sold and gone too. It's Christmas Eve, boy. Be good to me, for it went for you. Maybe the hairs of my head were numbered," she went on with a sudden serious sweetness, "but nobody could ever count my love for you. Shall I put the chops on, Jim?" Out of his trance, Jim seemed quickly to wake. He enfolded his Della. For 10 seconds, let us regard with discreet scrutiny some inconsequential object in the other direction. $8 a week or $1 million a year? What is the difference? A mathematician or wit would give you the wrong answer. The Magi brought valuable gifts, but that was not among them. This dark assertion will be illuminated later on. Jim drew a package from his overcoat pocket and threw it upon the table.
"Don't make any mistakes, Del,"
he said.
"About me, I don't think there's anything in the way of a haircut or a shave or shampoo that could make me like my girl any less. But if you'll unwrap that package, you may see why you had me going for a while at first."
White fingers and nimble tore at the string and paper, and then, in a static scream of joy, and then Alas, a quick feminine change to hysterical tears and wails, necessitating the immediate employment of all the comforting powers of the Lord of the Flat. For there lay the combs, the set of combs, side and back, that Della had worshipped for long in a Broadway window. Beautiful combs, pure tortoiseshell with jeweled rims, just the shade to wear in the beautiful vanished hair. They were expensive combs, she knew, and her heart had simply craved and yearned over them without the least hope of possession. And now they were hers, but the tresses that should have adorned the coveted adornments were gone. But she hugged them to her bosom, and at length she was able to look up with dim eyes and a smile and say, "My hair grows so fast, Jim." And then Della leaped up like a little singed cat and cried, "Oh, oh!" Jim had not yet seen his beautiful present. She held it out to him eagerly upon her open palm. The dull, precious metal seemed to flash with the reflection of her bright and ardent spirit. "Isn't it a dandy, Jim? I hunted all over town to find it. You'll have to look at the time 100 times a day now. Give me your watch. I want to see how it looks on it." Instead of obeying, Jim tumbled down on the couch and put his hands under the back of his head and smiled.
Dell,
said he,
let's put our Christmas presents away and keep them a while. They're too nice for us just at present. I sold the watch to get the money to buy your combs. And now, suppose you put the chops on.
The Magi, as you know, were wise men, wonderfully wise men, who brought gifts to the babe in the manger. They invented the art of giving Christmas presents. Being wise, their gifts were no doubt wise ones, possibly bearing the privilege of exchange in case of duplication. And here I have lamely related to you the uneventful chronicle of two foolish children in a flat who most unwisely sacrificed for each other the greatest treasures of their house. But in a last word to the wise of these days, let it be said that of all who give gifts, these two were the wisest. Of all who give and receive gifts, such as they are, wisest. Everywhere they are the wisest. They are the Magi. The end. So what do you all think? What do you think, Fletcher?
Oh, it's great. And we have Sir Glenn saying, "Howdy, folks." How's it, Glenn?
Howdy.
Really appreciate it.
Howdy,
yeah, we're trying
to Sir Glenn.
Yeah, we tried a little bit something different, a little dramatic reading. I almost felt like we needed some of that music to go tune, 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 right?
I think it's such a great story. We were so surprised when we were little kids reading this story that, you know, the lady would sell her most precious gift, even though she loved her hair, in order to give her husband a present for his favorite gift, his favorite item, which was his gold watch that he inherited, and that he would sell his most prized possession, his gold watch, to give her something for her beautiful hair, those fine combs that are tortoiseshell in the window that she had been admiring, and to know that they both did it on Christmas Eve because they didn't have any other money. And then, you know, it was both gifts turned out to be useless. I mean, the fob for the watch that was now gone, the tortoise comb shell combs for the hair that was now gone, but you know, they were happy, and they still had the chops on the stove, Fletcher.
Yeah. I mean, can't go wrong with chops. So. I know, it almost makes you think. Like, I don't think, did we even get any chops for Christmas today?
We have some chops. Yes, we do.
I
think that they'll always remember it, this young couple, because at the end of the day, it's not about the hair or the watch. It's about the love they have for each other that they're willing to sacrifice. And I love that O. Henry ends with the actual gifts that were first given that first Christmas. So Fletcher, please feel free to regale us with a little story about Santa. I will say this. Sometimes Christian folks get up in a twist about Santa Claus. I don't think we need to worry about Santa. First of all, the name Santa means holy, it means saint. And there was an actual Saint Nicholas, which you can learn about. We might actually do a video about him. And he was an Armenian bishop who did save a couple of young women from a fate worse than death by paying for them to, I think, have a dowry or pay back some debt that their parents may have owed or what have you. And he would wear like a red kind of bishop's mitre and hat that people say inspired what we now say is Santa Claus. So yes, sometimes it can get too commercialized, but the idea of Santa is not commercial and is not pagan. It's coming from an actual holy saint, Saint Nicholas, and I believe of Armenia. So we'd love to hear about this famous poem about him. Now, the stories about him delivering presents all in one night, that came about from legend, but he was an actual real figure.
Yeah, and it's also we always think about it as the night before Christmas, but the actual poem by Clement Clarke Moore is called "A Visit from St. Nicholas." Changed before probably, to sell more merch, right?
Yeah.
And it reads, "'Twas the night before Christmas when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung from a chimney with care, in hopes of St. Nicholas, who soon would be there. The children would nestle all snug in their beds, while visions of sugar plums danced in their heads. And Mamma in her kerchief, and I in my cap, had just settled our brains for a long winter nap. When out of the lawn there arose such a clatter, I sprang from my bed to see what's the matter. Away from the window I flew like a flash, tore open the shutters, threw up the sash. The moon and the breast of the new fallen snow have a luster of midway to effects below. When what to my wondering eyes does appear but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer.
Wow.
With a little old driver so lovely and quick, I knew in a moment he must be Saint Nick.
Ooh.
More rapid the eagles his course they came. He whistled, he shouted, and called them by name. Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen. Oh, Comet, Cupid, oh, Donner and Blitzen. To the top of the porch, to the top of the wall. Now sash away, sash away, sash away. As leaves that before the wild hurricane fly, when they met with an obstacle, mount in the sky. So up to the house top, the courses they flew, with the sleigh full of toys, and St. Nicholas too. And then in a twinkling I heard on the roof the prancing and pawing of each little hoof. As I drew in my head and was turning around, down the chimney St. Nicholas came in a bound. And he was dressed in all fur from the head to his foot, and his clothes were all tarnished with ash and soot. A bundle of toys he had flung in his back, and he looked like a pauper just opened his pack. His eyes, how they twinkle, his simples how merry, his cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. His droll little mouth was drawn like a bow, and his beard and his chins was as white as the snow. The stump of a pipe he held tight in his teeth, and the smoke it encircled his head like a wreath. He had broad face, a little round belly, that shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly. He was chubby and plump as right jolly old elf, and laughed when I saw him, in spite of myself. A wink of his eye, a twist of his head, soon gave me to know he had nothing to bread. And he spoke with a word but went straight to his work. He filled all the stockings, then turned with a jerk, and leaving his fingers aside of his nose, and giving a nod of the chimney he rose. He sprang to his sleigh, his team gave a whistle, and away they all flew like the sow of a thistle. But he heard him exclaim as he drove out of sight, Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good
night.
Woo! Yay!
Yay, Fletcher. That was very nice. Thank you.
Thank you. Merry Christmas, gang. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
For hanging out. Yeah.
For hanging out. Merry Christmas to you. Please celebrate. Doesn't matter. You can think about the O. Henry story. If you don't have a lot, it's okay. You have love. Even if you don't have someone to share it with, you have love in your heart. That's the good thing about being a believer in Jesus. He's always there. You always have him. So enjoy. Even if Santa gets stuck in the mountains and can't bring your present in time tomorrow.
Thank you, Sir Glenn. Hippie finger snapping.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. There we go. All right. We'll see you guys Thursday.
Thank you so much. See you later, guys.
Ave Maria, Maria, rogai por nós, Santa Mãe de Deus.